The cardboard box in Logan Carter's arms held almost nothing. A coffee mug, a phone charger, a single folder. He walked out through the front entrance of Harrison Global's headquarters, while laughter trailed behind him from the open office floor. Sharp and unhurried, the kind people allow themselves when they are certain they have already won. Vanessa Brooks stood near the glass doors, arms crossed, wearing the quiet smile of someone who had just solved a problem. Logan stepped onto the front stairs, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. He made one call. His voice was level, almost casual. Fire every one of them. Within minutes, the building behind him began to collapse from the inside. Welcome back to HeartNest Stories. If you love dramatic tales of hidden identities and ultimate payback, you're in the right place. Before we dive into the rest of the story, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, and let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Your support means the world to us. Now let's get back to the story. Logan Carter had been back in the United States for less than 3 weeks when he walked into Harrison Global's downtown headquarters carrying nothing but a leather messenger bag and a name that meant nothing to anyone in that building. That was exactly how he wanted it. He had spent the last several years working overseas supply chain consulting, operational restructuring, the kind of unglamorous work that required long hours and short expectations. He had learned more from that experience than from any boardroom meeting he had ever sat in. And when his father called to say the time had come, Logan did not ask for the chairman's office. He asked for a desk on the 14th floor and a standard employee badge with no special access. His father, Harrison Carter, had built the company from a regional logistics firm into one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the country over the course of 4 decades. The man was 71 years old, deliberate in everything he did, and had spent the last 2 years preparing for a transition that most people inside the company did not know was already in motion. Harrison had one condition. Whoever took the seat after him had to understand the company from the ground up, not from above. Logan agreed without argument. It was the same philosophy that had guided his entire working life. So, Logan showed up on a Monday morning in plain dark trousers, a simple button-down shirt, and shoes that were clean, but not expensive. He introduced himself to the HR coordinator as a new operations associate on temporary assignment. The coordinator, a quiet man named Greg, handed him a badge, pointed him toward the 14th floor, and went back to his paperwork. Nobody looked twice. That was the point. The 14th floor housed the mid-level operations team, project coordinators, data analysts, compliance officers, and a small cluster of administrative staff who handled internal reporting and vendor communications. It was not the most glamorous floor in the building, but Logan had specifically requested it. The work done there was the connective tissue of the company. If something was wrong with the culture of Harrison Global, it would show up on the 14th floor before it showed up anywhere else. His direct supervisor was Vanessa Brooks. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, efficient in the way people become when they have held a position long enough to know exactly how little effort is required to maintain it. She wore authority like a tailored jacket, fitted deliberate and slightly too tight for anyone else to borrow. On Logan's first day, she looked him over once and said without particular interest that he would be handling data consolidation for the quarterly compliance report. She handed him a stack of documents that were already 3 days overdue and walked away before he could respond. Logan sat down, opened the stack, and got to work. The data was a mess, inconsistent formatting, missing source tags, duplicated entries across departments. It was not difficult to fix, just tedious and time-consuming. He spent most of that first day in silence working through the documents, while the rest of the floor moved around him. He noticed early on that the team functioned in a particular social geography. There was an inner circle, Vanessa at the center, flanked closely by Derek Walsh and Paula Simmons, and then there was everyone else. The distinction was not subtle. Derek was loud, loose with opinions, and had a talent for saying things that sounded like jokes, but weren't. Paula was quieter, but more precise. The kind of person who watched everything and said only what was necessary to stay aligned with whoever held the most influence in the room. By the end of his first week, Logan had completed 3 assignments that were originally divided among 4 people. He had not announced this. He simply put the finished reports in the shared drive with clean formatting and moved on. 2 days later, he overheard Derek telling Vanessa that the consolidated vendor report, the one Logan had spent 12 hours restructuring, had been praised by the compliance director. Derek took credit for it without hesitation, without even a flicker of discomfort. Vanessa nodded approvingly and CC'd Derek on the follow-up email to senior leadership. Logan's name did not appear anywhere in the chain. He read the email, closed his laptop, and went to get a cup of coffee. He was not surprised. He was paying attention. Over the following 2 weeks, a pattern established itself with very little variation. Any work Logan completed that produced a good result would be claimed by someone else. Usually Derek or Paula, sometimes Vanessa herself. Any process that went wrong, a delayed response, a misrouted file, a miscommunication between departments, would find its way to Logan's desk as his fault, regardless of whether he had been involved. The floor had a well-worn system for this. Errors needed a name attached to them before they reached Vanessa, and the name attached was almost always a person with the least standing to push back. Logan was that person, and he had chosen to remain that person for now. There were moments that were harder to absorb than others. One afternoon, a compliance analyst named Ruth, a woman in her early 30s, who had been at the company for 6 years, made a formatting error in a regulatory submission. The error was minor and easily corrected, but Vanessa called it out in the middle of the open floor in front of the entire team, her voice carrying enough edge to make sure everyone heard. Ruth sat very still, her face controlled, and said, "Yes." She understood. She would correct it immediately. After Vanessa walked away, Ruth stared at her screen for a long moment without moving. Logan watched that moment and filed it away alongside everything else he had been collecting. What struck him was not the correction itself, but the way Ruth absorbed it. The practiced stillness of someone who had learned that any visible reaction would be used against her. There was also a quieter kind of cruelty that ran beneath the surface. Lunch plans that were made just loudly enough for Logan to hear, then finalized in a way that made clear he was not included. Questions directed at him in meetings that were designed not to gather information, but to expose gaps, phrased carefully publicly, so that any stumble became a data point in the running case against his competence. Requests that arrived at 4:50 in the afternoon for deliverables due by the following morning. Never with enough context to complete them cleanly. Always with enough ambiguity to assign blame if something went wrong. None of it rose to the level of a formal complaint on its own. That was the sophistication of it. Each incident could be explained away individually. Together, they formed something much more deliberate. Logan ran 5 miles most mornings before the sun came up. He had learned to use early hours for thinking, not just exercise. On those runs, he processed what he was seeing without the noise of the office around him. He had gone into this arrangement expecting to find the ordinary friction of corporate life. Politics, inefficiency, the occasional personality conflict. What he was finding instead was a managed ecosystem. The bullying on the 14th floor was not casual or disorganized. It was institutional. IT had a structure, a hierarchy, and a shared understanding among its participants about what was permitted and what was protected. People lower in the hierarchy either participated or stayed silent, because silence was the only form of neutrality the environment allowed. He thought about his father's company, not as a chairman's son, but as someone who had spent years studying organizations and what made them function or fail. That a company could have excellent products, strong financials, and a well-regarded brand, while rotting in the middle floor by team one, silenced employee at a time. Harrison Global had been built on a different idea. His father had said more than once that a company's real value was not on the balance sheet, but in whether the people inside it trusted each other. Logan had understood that as a principle for most of his life. He was only now seeing what it looked like when the opposite was true. In his 3rd week, Vanessa assigned him to lead the documentation for a sensitive internal data audit. IT was more responsibility than anything he'd been given before, and he took it seriously. He built the tracking system from scratch, coordinated with 3 separate departments, and had the initial framework ready 2 days ahead of schedule. He shared access with Vanessa and Derek so the broader team could continue building on it while he completed the final sections. That IT was a reasonable and professional decision. He would come to understand later exactly how it was used against him. On a Thursday morning, Logan arrived at the office to find Derek and Paula already in Vanessa's glass-walled office. The blinds were drawn, which was unusual. HR Director Sandra Pruitt was also there, seated across from Vanessa with a folder open in front of her. Logan had barely set down his bag when Sandra stepped out and asked him to come in. Her expression was the practiced neutrality of someone delivering information they did not write. Vanessa stood to the side, arms folded. Derek sat in the corner with the specific stillness of a person who already knows how a scene ends. Sandra told him that a significant volume of restricted client data had been accessed and extracted from the audit system over the past 48 hours. The activity had originated from the access credentials Logan had used to build the tracking framework. There was, she said, a clear audit trail. The company's position was that a serious breach of data security had occurred, and given the evidence, they could not in good conscience continue his employment. Logan asked if he could see the audit trail. Sandra looked at Vanessa. Vanessa said that the documentation was being held by the legal department pending further review and that it was not available to him at this time. Logan asked if there was a process for contesting the decision. Sandra said that given the nature of the incident, the termination was immediate and final. She slid a single-page document across the desk and asked him to sign it acknowledging receipt of the termination notice. Logan looked at the document for a moment, then signed it. He asked for a copy which Sandra provided. He thanked her. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Vanessa or Derek. He picked up his bag, walked back to his desk, and placed his coffee mug, his charger, and the one folder he kept there into the small cardboard box that Sandra had left beside his chair. The floor was very quiet. People were watching without appearing to watch. Logan carried the box to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and walked out through the front entrance into the afternoon light. He stood at the top of the entrance stairs. The glass doors behind him reflected the pale sky. He set the box down on the concrete railing, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a contact saved under a single initial and pressed call. The line connected on the second ring. Logan's voice was even unhurried and entirely without anger. He said 3 sentences. The first was an instruction to contact the general counsel and convene the board within the hour. The second was a request to have the full digital record of the 14th floor, every email, every access log, every performance review for the past 4 years placed under immediate legal hold. The third sentence was the one that would echo through every corridor of that building before the day was over. Fire every one of them. He ended the call, picked up his box, and walked toward the parking structure. Behind him, through the glass doors, the lobby was already beginning to change. The call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Logan sat in his car in the parking structure beneath Harrison Global, with the engine off and the cardboard box on the passenger seat. The general counsel, Martin Cole, had picked up before the second ring, which told Logan that his father had already been in contact. Martin was measured and professional, but there was an urgency in his voice that he did not fully conceal. Logan told him what he needed: the legal hold on all digital records going back 4 years, the board convened within the hour, and a complete blackout on his identity until he gave the signal. Martin said he understood. Logan ended the call and sat in the quiet of the concrete structure for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. He was not angry. That surprised some people when they heard the story later, but it would not have surprised anyone who knew him well. Anger required surprise, and Logan had not been surprised by anything that happened on the 14th floor. He had been watching it build for 3 weeks. What he felt sitting in that car was something closer to clarity, the kind that arrives when a problem you have been studying finally reveals its full shape, and you understand exactly what it requires. That he drove home, changed his shirt, and was back in the building 40 minutes later. This time, he did not enter through the front lobby. He took the executive elevator from the private parking level, used the access code his father had given him on his first day back in the country, and rode it directly to the 32nd floor, where the boardroom and the executive offices occupied the entire western face of the building. The view from up there looked out over the city in a way that the 14th floor never did. Logan had always thought that was part of the problem with how most companies were structured. The people at the top spent too much time looking outward and not enough time looking down at what was happening inside. Harrison Carter was already in the boardroom when Logan arrived. The old man was standing at the head of the long table, not seated, because Harrison Carter did not sit in meetings when he was agitated. He was dressed as always in a dark suit with no tie, his white hair trimmed close, his posture carrying the particular straightness of someone who had never entirely stopped being military in his bearing, even decades after the fact. He looked at his son when Logan walked in, and something in the set of his expression shifted, not quite relief, but something adjacent to it. Martin Cole was already there with two members of the legal team. Two board members had dialed in remotely and appeared on the screen at the far end of the room. Sandra Pruitt, the HR director, who had delivered Logan's termination notice just hours earlier, had also been summoned. She sat at the far end of the table with the careful composure of someone who understood that her position in this room had changed significantly since that morning. Harrison did not open the meeting with pleasantries. He confirmed the legal hold was in place, that IT security had already been pulled in to run a parallel audit of the data access logs, and that nobody on the 14th floor had been informed of any change. The building continued to function exactly as it had 2 hours ago. The 14th floor believed they had won. Logan stood at the table and walked through the last 3 weeks without notes. He described the pattern of work misappropriation, the deliberate assignment of blame, the fabricated data breach. He told them about Ruth, about the 450 deadlines, about the email chain where Derek took credit for 12 hours of Logan's work. Sandra listened to this without expression, but Logan saw her hand tighten slightly on the folder in front of her. She had been given a document that morning and asked to deliver it without being allowed to examine the underlying evidence. That much was apparent. Martin's team had already begun pulling the access logs. Within the first 30 minutes of examination, the trail was clear. The data extraction flagged as Logan's had been initiated through his credentials, but the originating device did not match any machine he had ever logged in from. The IP address resolved to a workstation registered to Derek Walsh. Someone had obtained Logan's credentials and used them from Derek's terminal. It was not a sophisticated operation. It was the kind of thing that worked because the people doing it had never been seriously examined before. Martin set the preliminary findings on the table and said simply that the framing was unambiguous. The legal team would need another few hours to compile the complete picture, but what they already had was sufficient to act. Harrison looked at Logan and asked him how he wanted to proceed. Logan said he wanted to proceed with the all-hands meeting as planned, and he wanted the evidence presented without any announcement of his identity beforehand. His father nodded. Sandra was instructed to prepare the company-wide meeting notice and to say nothing beyond what the notice contained. The all-hands meeting was called for 4 o'clock. The notice went out company-wide through the internal communication system. All staff, all floors, mandatory attendance in the main atrium. The message was brief. The founding chairman had an announcement regarding the company's future leadership, nothing more. In the 2 hours between the notice and the meeting, the building hummed with speculation. On the 14th floor, Vanessa held court near the window bank, speaking in the low, confident register of someone who considered themselves adjacent to important information. She mentioned twice that transitions like this were usually opportunities for people who had demonstrated real value to the organization. Derek laughed at something she said. Paula refreshed her email. None of them connected the meeting to the termination they had executed that morning, and none of them noticed that Sandra Pruitt had not returned to the floor after her morning meeting. The atrium on the ground floor of Harrison Global was designed for exactly this kind of gathering. High ceilings, a raised platform at the north end, enough floor space to hold the entire company standing. By 3:50, the room was full. Logan stood in a side corridor off the platform with Martin Cole watching the crowd through a narrow gap in the partition. He could see Vanessa near the center of the room, positioned with the easy confidence of someone who expected to hear good news. Derek stood beside her. Paula was a few feet back, arms crossed, watching the stage. Harrison Carter walked onto the platform at 4 o'clock with the unhurried authority of a man who had been doing this for 40 years. The room settled immediately. He spoke without a microphone for the first sentence, and then someone adjusted the sound system, and his voice filled the space. He thanked the company for its work over the decades. He said that building Harrison Global had been the defining project of his life, and that handing it to the right person was the most important decision he had left to make. He said he had spent a long time thinking about what kind of leader this company needed, not just someone who understood. And that brings us to the end of today's story here on HeartNest Stories. What did you think of Logan's ultimate payback? Let us know in the comments if you saw that twist coming. If you enjoyed this satisfying tale of justice, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell icon so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.